fellow Americans.
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending him in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planning information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plan in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect, it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done, and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem. We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals.
So do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this this is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over a cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email. And all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. And the media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament,
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be on the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway. Or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip. Because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, They get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show, but if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, one of the 4 principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbunda women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everybody, to Redacted. On this show, we question everything. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natalie Morris.
And we've got a very busy show for you on this Tuesday. Are we about to see a massive false flag in Gaza on the part of Israel? We are going to dive deep into a lot of the signs that are coming out of the mainstream media and the words of the Israeli government. Very concerning stuff that we're going to dive into. So get ready for false flags. We are going to be warning you about those.
Now, also, everything you think about the Orlando shooting, the nightclub shooting, is wrong. The city of Orlando is about to spend $2 million to build an memorial to gay rights, basically, when this story is not at all about gay rights. We're going to bring you that as well.
We're also going to look at this Israeli hostage situation. So on October 7th, we were told one particular story about this, and now new interviews have emerged about on the Israeli side, Israeli hostages who were there that day, and they gave interviews, talked to television stations. Now those interviews are being suppressed. We're going to dive deeply into that story and the vaccine lawsuits, which could be coming for Pfizer and Big Pharma, as of course we've now opened the floodgates potentially on adverse effects that we're going to dive deeply into. All of that and more as Redacted starts right now. Reven in our chat says, warnings about false flags are just spoilers at this point. Yes, Reven, R-E-V-A-N. Yes, you're right about that.
Well, sure. We've had many wars to teach us that, right? Weapons of mass destruction, long-range missiles.
Syria.
We have, chemical attacks. Yeah, sure. We have lots of those. So thanks for that perspective. We're going to break down what kind of narratives we are, fed and which kinds we receive and perpetuate, all of that on Redacted. Hey, we want to tell you we have a daily newsletter. It goes along with this show. You can find our newsletter every day that this show comes out. That's Monday through Thursday. You can find it at redacted.inc. You sign up for our daily newsletter. It's free. Totally free. You get a welcome email that looks like this, and then you click there to authenticate your email address, and then we're off to the races.
It might be in your spam folder.
Yeah, check your spam folder in case it goes there. But it is a great way to study up for the topics that we talk about here, because it is absolutely not required that you feel about things the way we do. We present you our take and our interpretation of news, but you should develop your own assessment based on original sources. So we try and give you links to the most original sources that we can find about news of the day, and then you get a handle on what we're going to talk about later in the show. I know a lot of you, it's almost like you study, but I don't want to frame it that way. I want it to be more fun than like study. But I can tell who reads the newsletter based on the chat, and I appreciate it. I love an informed audience. And I also really love your comments coming back to us. So, it has 3 or 4 top stories plus a bunch of other little tidbit fun things. So you can find it at redacted.inc. Once again, totally free. Find it over at redacted.inc.
Well, get ready, everyone. We could be about to see a major false flag operation coming out of Israel into the Gaza Strip. The Israeli government, of course, knows that a massive ground operation, would be devastating to the Israeli army, going through tunnels that are booby-trapped, all sorts of incendiary devices. It would be an absolute disaster. That's why over the past 24 hours, we're hearing some bizarre rhetoric now showing up in mainstream media and coming from mouthpieces of the Israeli government that Hamas may be preparing chemical weapons, and therefore it would be justified to go into the Gaza Strip and launch a chemical attack of their own using gas to push through these tunnels. Here is the son of one of Hamas's co-founders on Fox and Friends. This is Mossab Hassan Youssef. He joined Fox and Friends, and this was earlier on past week, and now we're hearing it from the Israeli government, suggesting that Israel should explore using gas to get rid of underground tunnels in Gaza. Watch.
This is material which was found on the body of one of those sadistic villains. It's Al-Qaeda material, official Al-Qaeda material. We're dealing with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hamas. This is what we're dealing with. And in this material, there were instructions how to produce chemical weapons. It speaks about arson, and it speaks about various chemicals that come out and produce chemical weapons. Simple as that.
So are we about to see a false flag operation unfolding right before our eyes? Larry Johnson, former member of the CIA, joins us now. I thought Larry would be perfect to talk about how you lay the groundwork for a false flag. And as journalists, it's important for us to sound the alarm bells here and to dig into the truth behind this. Larry, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Clayton. Good to be with you.
So when you see this, and you see what the Israeli government has been saying over the past 24 hours, that Hamas may be preparing chemical weapons. I mean, my immediate flashback is to Colin Powell holding up a vial of anthrax, telling us that we need to go after Saddam Hussein because of weapons of mass destruction. And I'm seeing like flashbacks here. Am I wrong about that?
Well, in fact, let's go to a more recent example. 10 years ago in Ghouta, up in Syria, there was supposedly a sarin gas attack by the government of Syria. And it wasn't by the government of Syria. It was by British intelligence, CIA, working with Syrian rebels. They're the ones that did it. They staged it. It was staged through a group called the White Helmets. And the purpose of that false flag then was to give the United States justification to cross the red line, as Barack Obama had said, that they would go use military force. U.S. military would intervene in Syria. Fortunately, it was exposed that really was not true. But nonetheless, the message got out there. So I think you put your finger on it. They are leaking this information now about, Hamas has got chemical weapons. Therefore, we're going to need to use chemical weapons in return. And they're laying that to the groundwork to justify what they're going to do, because they realize their only hope of trying to weave their way through that maze of tunnels and underground bunkers that Hamas has constructed is perhaps to try to use poison gas to flush them out. But, the irony factor here of Israel, a nation established in order to provide safe haven from people who were gassed in the gas chambers of Auschwitz and Treblinka, are now using gas to eliminate and destroy Hamas.
It is remarkable. I mean, to think about the irony of that, right? That here Israel would consider using this. So Hamas fighters, according to President Herzog in Israel, in an exclusive interview with Sky News, saying Hamas fighters were carrying instructions on how to make chemical weapons. I guess when they were captured. That to me sounds like the biggest crock of bullshit I have heard in a long time. That they're literally carrying recipes and we just happen to find them. I mean, come on. I mean, look.
Yeah. Well, they left the recipe for hummus at home. They had to have something. It's just, I mean, you're right. It's absurd because you don't go around with a quote recipe for a chemical weapon. It's not something that everybody can make. And the reality is, if you're going to actually make a legitimately lethal chemical agent, it has to be handled in an appropriate way so that you don't kill yourself while creating it. So this is not the kind of thing that just your average Hamas fighter is going to have in their possession. You're right. That's one of the ways that you identify a false flag, when something that's really so absurd and out of the normal pops up and it's being touted as evidence.
So this is how, as you say, the CIA, I mean, you worked at the CIA. You understand how these things work. You talk about what happened in Syria. Talk about how the British intelligence laid this false flag and created the justification to go in and destroy Syria, which was one of the most peaceful countries in the world. Destroyed them because of this false flag, using the white helmets as cover. But, as Mark Twain, I think, said, right, a lie can travel all the way around the world before the truth has a chance to put on its pants, right? And I hope I'm not butchering that, Samuel Clemens. I apologize. But here you go, right? And so now it took a lot of years of hard work by great journalists, and Piers Robinson and Aaron Mate and other great journalists and the OPC boy W to be able to come out and prove that didn't happen, that Assad did not gas his own people. But it doesn't matter because the damage is already done. And now you have Sky News, you have Fox News pushing these things, and this seems like it could possibly happen, and the justification is all over the media now.
Well, there'll be people in the intel community that'll know that it's a lie. I remember in August of 2013, when this event unfolded, I was still working inside the intelligence community, and I still had top secret access. And I remember as soon as that happened, I went back and I looked at the briefs from the preceding days, because the way Syria's chemical weapons program worked, it was binary, which means you had two separate agents that were inert, but when you mixed them together, then they became active and lethal. And so to do that, you have to activate a chemical weapons unit, an actual group of men that come in to assemble and prepare those weapons. And then once they are prepared, you got about 36 hours. So what I'm saying in that, there should have been an intelligence signature prior to that, because one of the things the United States and Israel both monitored was that part of the Syrian army to identify, are they preparing to launch an attack? There was nothing. And in fact, even the day and two after it happened, all it noted was that there was a protest from Europe. So that's one of the clear signs that you know that it's an inside job when the intel's not reporting on it. Because if the intel's doing its right job, it's going to be saying, hey, we got this indicator, we got that indicator, we see this developing. That didn't happen.
So like a paper trail, a dripping of this.
Yeah.
And there's none of that. And President Herzog yesterday in that Sky News interview said that the material, the official said they were carrying these recipes, basically diagrams for chemical weapons, and they were official Al-Qaeda material, which I also find hilarious. A group that we've openly funded and backed, right, for years, and Hamas as well. So this idea, this notion that a group that we've openly supported, we've openly partnered with Al-Qaeda, that they would have these diagram materials. What do you make of that piece of the story?
Yeah, no, well, it's one of the average American may not necessarily be fully aware of Hamas. Boy, they know about Al-Qaeda, because Al-Qaeda got a lot of media coverage, bin Laden and such. So, just lash them up all together. That's, it's the guilt by association. And during all of the Al-Qaeda operations, I don't recall a single instance in which they used chemical weapons, in which they used a chemical attack is part of their, that wasn't their signature. Their signature was doing simultaneous bombings, or trying to bomb multiple targets, going back to, the Bojinka plot in 1994 to blow up 5 jumbo jets, to hitting the Tanzanian and Kenyan embassies in the same day and within minutes of each other. So, that wasn't Al-Qaeda's thing. So introducing them into this is a little silly.
And this is not to downplay. I mean, I think when we have it's sad that we have to even have this discussion, but we always have to sort of couch it by saying this is not to downplay what Hamas did on October 7th. And killing civilians and dragging and brutally. We see the footage, of course, from the Israeli government sharing with journalists the other day, of course, so we know what happened. That's not this discussion. What we're talking about is using chemical weapons to put gas inside of tunnels. And when you have many people in northern Gaza saying, we're not leaving our homes, like you're asking us to leave our homes, so innocent people, that how are you going to contain this? This will be an absolute massacre if they're able to use chemical weapons to root out people living in these tunnel systems. It's not just going to affect the people in tunnel systems, is it?
No, it will. The high likelihood of more civilian casualties is there. What's going to be interesting is, Israel was the troops that actually tried to deliver this agent, if they're able to do so. They're going to be heavily in what's called MOP gear. It's basically a spacesuit. So they wear the spacesuit so that they can handle the material without ingesting it, inhaling it, and killing themselves. But when you put those on, you lose a lot of situational awareness around you. You get tunnel vision. You don't hear as well, and so they actually become more prominent targets. So the Israelis are going to face a challenge in trying to get, figure out how to introduce this into these tunnels. Because I've been told by a friend that's still on the inside, he says the Hamas tunnels, he says, are unbelievable from the intel they've got. They're as big that you could actually be riding a motorcycle underneath the ground from point A to point B, carrying supplies to a new location. So I don't think we have a real good understanding of how extensive the fortifications are by Hamas, what they've done over the last several years. Because go back to that attack on October 7th. This was not an unplanned, spontaneous decision. This had been planned, and they weren't just randomly killing civilians. Remember, part of their goal was to grab and capture civilians and Israeli soldiers who didn't fight back, take them as hostage, because they want to exchange prisoners for the Hamas prisoners being held in Israeli prisons. And you saw just yesterday, one of those Hamas prisoners died while in custody, unexplained. So, it's not Hamas just being brutal for the sake of being brutal. They have a purpose behind what they're doing. And the West makes a very big mistake if all we want to do is portray them as a bunch of cartoon, vicious, malignant terrorists without understanding that they actually have a plan and are trying to accomplish something. And part of what they're trying to accomplish, I think, is suck Israel and the United States into an ambush. I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and I think this could lead to by doing this could lead to the total destruction of Israel, the total collapse of Israel by doing this and being sucked into this moment right now. And I think also this is amazing to think that they had this intelligence. I'll get you out of here on this, Larry, which is if as President Herzog says, they have these diagrams and plans of chemical weapons. They're actively creating chemical weapons in this cave system. And they have them, or they're building them, or they're using them, they're about to use them. And you're now just learning this? You have 2 years of planning, out in the open, literally an area the size of Philadelphia. You're actively planning for this October 7th mission. The movement, can you talk about this, like the movement of materials for chemical weapons, tracking of the agents involved in these chemical weapons, cyanide, pieces of this? Wouldn't Israel be tracking all of that and be fully aware that this is coming into the Gaza Strip if that were truly the case?
Yeah, well, you're not talking about a large volume of agents. It's something that can be relatively small. 2 50-gallon drums, for example. But Israel has lived or thrived off of its reputation for having this superb network of human assets, agents that are spying on their behalf and providing them information. And yet we're then asked to believe they got completely caught unawares on October 7th, which I actually do believe that happened. I don't think that they are as stupid as to believe that they could allow this kind of attack to go on and then it would work in their favor. I mean, what you're seeing right now, this is the thing everybody needs to understand. I keep hammering on this every chance I get. And unlike every attack against Israel since the creation in 1948, now this is the first time we've seen this kind of unity and support for the Palestinian cause within the Arab, Muslim, and most of the rest of the world. That it's a unity that's come together. That means that basically the United States, Israel, maybe with the UK and France, that's about it. It's not. There's not massive support out there for Israel as there has been in the past. In the past, even after the Yom Kippur War, Saudi Arabia and Egypt weren't chomping at the bit to get back and support the Palestinians. They were sort of indifferent to it. And the United States always had an open channel of communication to them. That's not the case now. You've got Egypt's not returning Biden's phone call. The King of Jordan's blowing them off. The Saudis aren't talking. They have come together, and even Turkey is engaged in a very significant fashion. So we're at something very, very new and very, very dangerous. That the chances of this escalating I think, are significant, more so than ever during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I agree. I think we're sitting on a doorstep of Armageddon and the total destruction of Israel if this is carried out the way that it sounds like it's looking to this invasion of Gaza in this way. Brother, unbelievable times. Yeah. Thank you so much, Larry. I appreciate your insights on this. Second to none, of course, in your connections and understanding the intelligence community and these false flags. So thank you, guys. Thank you so much for your coverage on your website. Where can people read more about your coverage? You have some great blog posts up there.
Yeah, sonar21.com, SONAR21.com.
It's a must read. It's part of my daily reading routine. Larry Johnson, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today, Larry.
Always a pleasure, Clayton. Thanks.
Thanks, Larry. And thanks to all of you for subscribing to the channel. I see here in the comments said, hey, there's 16,000 of us watching and only 2,000 likes. Please, what YouTube's algorithm works very oddly, they suppress our show on a regular basis and independent media, and they elevate like the BBC and CNN and these types of channels. But during a live broadcast, if you actually hit the like button, it actually pushes it further out in the algorithm. And we've been able to track this through data. And we actually see that more people see the live show and they come and join us here, people who might otherwise be watching CNN or something. So please, if you would, it's free, just to hit that like button. We really appreciate it. And it helps to spread the word a little bit.
Right, because we're excited to tell you more news. We're going to bring you a story about the Orlando shooting from 2016 that is something you probably have not heard before. You probably think it was a story about homophobia and that you should put a rainbow flag on your profile if you stand against it. That's not the story at all. We're going to talk about what the real story is so we actually honor those victims instead of tell lies and present false flags. We're also going to give you an update on the Israeli hostage situation and talk with Steve Kirsch about the possibility of major lawsuits coming for biopharmaceutical companies who presented COVID products that were problematic. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Indeed, because the thing about running your own business is that every single hire counts, and no hiring partner understands that like Indeed. Indeed is the platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. So don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. If you hate waiting, well, Indeed's U.S. data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Candidates you invite to apply through Instant Match are 3 times more likely to apply to your job than candidates who only see it in search, according to Indeed's U.S. data. So join the 3 million businesses worldwide using Indeed to hire great talent fast. Now, Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. So with Indeed, you only pay for qualified applications that match your must-have job requirements. Indeed knows that hiring needs to be cost effective. So they know that when you're doing everything for your company, you can't afford to overspend on hiring. So right now, you are supporting independent media. They are supporting independent media as well. So if you support them, you are also supporting us. Visit Indeed.com/redacted to start hiring right now. Just go to Indeed.com/redacted. One more time, that's Indeed.com/redacted. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. If you need to hire, you need Indeed.
That's right. Thank you so much. And I just want to comment on something that this person says. Jim Joe. Jim Joe says nothing, in all caps, by the way. Jim Joe says nothing Redacted has predicted. First of all, we're not predictors and we're not soothsayers here on the show. We analyze the facts and we follow them where they go. Nothing we've predicted has ever been correct. Okay, really? That's interesting. How about COVID? How about the tyranny of lockdowns? How about what's unfolded in Canada with censorship? How about what's happened in Ukraine being wiped off the map? How about the death of tens of thousands of Ukrainians? We said that and told you that would happen. That's happened. What's about to happen to the energy crisis that is unfolding in Europe right now as a result of the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline?
All right, you don't need to dunk on this guy. Don't fight with trolls.
Okay.
So,
I just want to.
And yeah, we're not predictors. And, a lot of the things that we look at, we're looking at the possibility of worst case scenarios so that we hopefully can avoid it.
And by the way, we just did a whole story on false flags. The whole point of pointing out, bless you, the whole point of calling out false flags is that so they do not happen, so that thousands of people do not die as a result of them releasing chemical gas into tunnels and killing people. So by calling out these signs of false flags, hopefully we can prevent that from happening. And so I'm happy to do that. And
Most of the stuff we do here, we don't want to be right. So we just want to talk about, like, what's the possibility? What could this lead to? Who's taking power grabs from it? And how can we take it back?
The U.S. just announced just a few minutes ago that they're planning mass evacuations if Gaza war escalates. 4 different U.S. This is in the Washington Post right now, that the U.S. is planning mass evacuations in the Middle East right now. And they want this to happen, by the way. They want this escalation. We don't want that to happen. We don't want anybody to die, and we certainly don't want that to happen, where people have to flee their homes and the U.S. has to have mass evacuations, and they're going to carry out bombing attacks on Syrian targets and in the Gaza Strip. It's going to be hell on earth. So hopefully that will not happen. Go ahead, Philip.
I would actually be happy if we had a 0% accuracy rate on what was going to happen.
Right.
If we were like, like that would mean that like tomorrow everybody's like, you know what, war sucks, we're giving it up just entirely. I'd be like, great.
Yeah. We were wrong. That sounds good.
Yeah, awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Anyway, thank you, Jim Joe. Just had to get that off my chest. Anyway,
right.
So here's a story, though.
Like you say to me, don't swing at a pitch in the dirt.
I know, but anyway, when we just did a whole story about false flags, and I'm just hoping he understands the concept of a false flag is to get you to believe something in order to support something, right? This is and the whole point of a false flag operation is propaganda and deception, and I'm trying to shine a light on what they're planning to do here.
Right, and again, we are trying to be the show that did not exist after the 9/11 wars that led us into years and years of war, decades now of wars, right? Where someone was there to question, what's this weapons of mass destruction thing? Is Afghanistan really connected to Iraq? Do we need to go both places? What's going on here? We were, led around by ignorance, and we don't want that to happen anymore if it results in decades-long war or even hours-long war. We want no war. No war is our platform.
Yeah. Can you imagine when the Gulf War broke out, or right before it was happening, if there was a show on CNN similar to this show?
There was Phil Donahue, and he got fired for it.
Was that on CNN?
No, he was on MSNBC.
He was on MSNBC. He was fired for, exactly. Phil Donahue's show for challenging all this war effort narrative. He was fired as a result of it.
We've brought you that story, including the leaked emails from NBC.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Thank you for the reminder. All right, let's get into this Orlando story. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, I do want to talk about this. Yeah.
Okay, I'll do it.
Let's do it. You want me to do it?
No.
Okay.
Never mind.
No, everything you thought you knew about the Orlando shooting is a total lie. Everything you think you heard about the 2016 Orlando shooting is actual garbage, and we're going to upend that, hopefully, that apple cart right now.
Well, this is not a story of homophobia. It is not an opportunity to tearfully clutch a rainbow flag. This is a story about wars. The city of Orlando, this is why we're bringing this up now, is buying the Pulse nightclub where the 2016 shooting took place. The city will pay $2 million to the venue and turn it into a memorial. So why are taxpayer dollars going to buy this scene of the crime in order to turn it into a gay memorial? Basically, that's all about gay rights and diversity and that kind of thing. But is that memorial the real story of what happened at the Pulse nightclub? It is not. This is a fake story of homophobia. The media framed the Pulse shooting as a story of closeted, self-hating homophobe who did this shooting. It wasn't that at all that motivated the shooter. Here's the Eiffel Tower in 2016 in a rainbow design to honor the victims of the shooting in June of 2016. Here's a Guardian columnist. Take a look at this guy. He walked off Sky News because the host would not admit that this is homophobia.
This has to be called out for what it is. It was an intentional attack on LGBT people. This person,
on the freedom of all people to try and enjoy themselves as Bataclan.
No, I'm sorry. Can we just explain? You don't understand this because you're not gay, okay? So just
whether
listen.
I'm gay or not has no.
No, it does.
It has no reflection on the fact this person killed.
You have ownership of horror of this crime.
Can I just say
because
I find this astounding.
I'm not Jewish and I'm not gay.
Excuse me. I've had enough of this. Let me go home. Sorry.
Owen,
No
genuinely, we're trying to have a civilised conversation.
I
know you're upset. You're upset,
I'm
and you're
very upset.
I'm
Very
quite
upset.
right. Everyone's upset and angry about this, but storming off a TV set.
Right, well, I think we'll continue the press
on?
preview.
All right.
Wow.
Well, on CNN, they absolutely lost their voices screaming about hate crimes and homophobia and gay rights and how we really have to get into the heart of this matter. Stop homophobia. Well, not only was this not a story of homophobia, the Orlando nightclub shooter, Omar Mateen, did not care about gayness at all. That was not his motivation. He cared about the fact that the U.S. would not stop bombing the Middle East and wanted to avenge those war crimes. He was an extremist. His terrorism was motivated by revenge for the war crimes that the U.S. has enacted on the Middle East. Mateen was of Afghan heritage. He told hostages when he had them in that small room that his motive was to stop the U.S. from bombing his country, and he wanted the U.S. to, quote, stop bombing Syria and Iraq, and, quote, killing a lot of innocent people. That is the real story of the Pulse nightclub shooting. It has nothing to do with being gay. But guess what? That didn't stop the One Pulse Foundation from fundraising on this gay pride movement. I want to play a little About Us video. We're going to play a little bit and start and stop it. This is a nonprofit that raises money around the Pulse nightclub shooting. And then they tell you, what they think this story is about and what they do to educate the community about gay rights. Now, again, none of these people died because they were gay. They died because their own country wages war against other countries, and that motivates extremists to take revenge on innocent people. But watch this false narrative.
Pulse wasn't just a nightclub. It was a place where people could come to feel welcome. It didn't matter who you were, who you wanted to be, you felt loved. This is what Pulse is now.
It was really important to me that people learned not only the story of what happened at Pulse that night, but also what you can do differently in your life to change the future, how we can become a better society, a better human
So you
race.
see the imagery here, right? It's about, look at all the gay flags, look at how they're saying hate will not win, that this was a hateful act. Surely it was, but it wasn't about hating homosexuality at all. Let's keep playing it, and then there's a part in here where there's like a drag queen in some kind of like kiss mask face, and they say we're educating kids in order to make sure that they understand that gay rights are important and this doesn't happen again. Again, knowing that that's not the thing that motivated the shooter, but they're taking the opportunity to promote gay rights. So watch. Sorry, I interrupted.
We are building a national memorial museum. It's part of our country's history, and it's our responsibility to see to it that this story and that the 49 are never forgotten. These museums and memorials aren't built for years. They're built for centuries. And what we're doing is more than just a memorial museum.
So they're likening this to the 9/11 memorial. I'm just going to keep talking. Just keep playing it. Sorry.
Can we mute it?
All walks of life, but
yeah, there we go.
No, we don't have to mute it. Just let them talk, and I'll.
Family member, I said, I hope they turn this place into a museum.
The memorial is where you go to grieve, but the museum is where you go to learn.
I want people to come visit so they can take what happened here and pass it on.
I'm really excited about the educational opportunity of the museum and the wonderful things that the One Pulse Foundation is working on to build a stronger global community.
And my hope is that when they walk out, they've learned not only what happened on June 12th, but how to be a better human, that they will be able to spread the message that we will not let hate win. They will leave equipped how to do that.
The interim memorial now is built, and it's amazing.
The pictures that are on the barrier wall are of love and support and unity, but mostly you will see a community, a global community.
This is a magical place. It's always a rainbow. You'll see a cloud look like an angel.
Okay, so you get the idea of the fundraising around this and how it is meant to, they say, promote love. What they mean is, gay pride and diversity and all those kind of things. And it's completely ignoring the fact that those people died out of revenge for the war crimes that their country was perpetuating, right? They're pretending that he was homophobic. He wasn't, and I'm going to tell you more about that later. Look at the city of Orlando mayor, Buddy Dyer. announcing today that the city of Orlando has approved the purchase to the Pulse site and going to ensure a permanent memorial. Look at the imagery here of the rainbow flags, the sort of women, I guess we're supposed to assume they're lesbians holding on to each other. I don't know if that's true, but it's still, again, rainbow empowerment is hit over the head with it, because in their mind, the shooter was anti-gay, and buying this nightclub is a chance for a gay pride memorial. But what it should be is an anti-war memorial, so that the rest of us don't have to, become a victim of extremists who are motivated by the war crimes of our own taxpayer dollars. What Mateen said when he held hostages inside the club was that he wanted bombing in Syria and Iraq to stop, and he wanted killing of innocent people to stop. Here is from Scott Horton's book about the post 9/11 wars. He points out what he put on Facebook, and during the actual hostage crisis, he said, "You kill innocent women and children by doing us airstrikes. Now taste the Islamic State vengeance." That's terrifying. Tell America to stop bombing Syria and Iraq and killing lots of innocent people. What am I to do here when my people are getting killed over there? You get what I'm saying? You need to stop the airstrikes. Now, why did he choose a gay club? Because when the Justice Department tried to prosecute his wife, they found out that he originally had his sights set on Disney World. I shudder to think how awful that would have been, but he figured the security was too tight, so he just felt like, okay, this place, easy to get into, right? What's more, Orlando police waited outside the club for hours as people inside bled to death, and when cops finally did breach the wall, they opened fire and also killed civilians. So this 49 number, not all 49 were killed by Omar Mateen, and no one was ever held accountable for that. In fact, the shooter had subscribed to al-Nusra agendas. Well, who is al-Nusra? That is a terrorist group that the U.S. has funded since the Obama administration to attack the government in Syria. Obama called them moderates. This is not the work of a moderate. Obviously, this is a radicalized person. That was just Obama's propaganda for saying that we work with the sort of okay guys. Al-Nusra is sort of okay. They inspire attacks on civilians in nightclubs in response to drone strikes on innocent civilians in Syria and Iraq. Okay. And so maybe you're thinking, well, so what? It's nice to have a queer monument. It's nice to help people to be accepting of gay rights and, honor these people's lifestyle. The problem with that is it's a lie. Would you rather do something to prevent more terrorist attacks against America by stopping American attacks and telling your government, hey, when we attack other countries, people get radicalized and want to hurt us back, so maybe we stop that? Or would you rather hug a rainbow flag and think that you're virtue signaling for acceptance when then those people's deaths are in vain?
Could you imagine a memorial? It's a great question. Imagine an Orlando memorial at the site of the Pulse nightclub that had nothing to do with this propaganda, about it was a homophobic attack and he targeted gay people on purpose and he went to this club specifically. Instead, that memorial is not there. Instead, it's a total memorial about U.S. aggression in the Middle East. A whole memorial showing
this is how people become radicalized when we attack innocent civilians. And so we can only stop radicalization by stopping those attacks in the first place. It's a chicken or egg phenomenon, people.
Now, of course,
instead, we're choosing this fake story. So those people, to my mind, are screaming from the grave, you're not stopping this by hugging a rainbow flag tearfully. You will stop this by speaking out against war.
Now, of course, killing innocent people is no way to go.
No, I'm not saying that he did it. And I'm saying he became radicalized because we continue to support radicals. Right? We support al-Nusra and we continue to wage war in the Middle East. And so this radicalization is not just because the internet exists, it's because taxpayer dollars exist.
Right. And
he did the wrong thing because of his radicalization, and we support that group.
And $2 million, it would cost $2 million
to buy the club.
To buy the club and to do this whole memorial. So $2 million to buy it. The city of Orlando People in Orlando are struggling big time with medical debt post-pandemic. There are people who, drowning in medical debt actually in Central Florida. So Buddy Dyer is happy to put up $2 million to buy this site of this Pulse nightclub.
Right. So if you live in that area and you drive by, and it will inevitably be full of, men in stilettos and thongs hugging rainbow flags tearfully, you will know that does nothing for the memory of these deaths. These people died because of radical revenge that we could prevent by not funding al-Nusra, by not waging wars in the Middle East.
Will part of the memorial, the museum, highlight the fact that not everyone who was killed that day was killed by him?
No, clearly not.
This is the kind of garbage clown world we live in.
But, if you go to this Pulse Nightclub Foundation, this One Pulse Foundation, it just seems comical because they're just all about
where do they get their money?
Donation. It's a donation-based foundation. So,
but I wonder who's their biggest
maybe you
donors.
can go there and say, hey, I want to give a big donation, but I want to donate, and you do a campaign about how this is actually should be an anti-war movement based on this violence and not gay rights. Can we do that? Maybe they'll take your money if you want to give that a try.
Yeah, unbelievable. Well, that's certainly a story we haven't heard before.
Well, it scares me because of all the propaganda that's being thrown around right now around Hamas or Hezbollah or other groups that maybe we want to call extremists, because we're not asking, well, what do they want? What have we done so bad to them to provoke them? Maybe there's an answer there that we can get to that might prevent violence, right? That's the thing. So let me know what you think about this in the chat.
We've got more news to get to here on your Tuesday. We're going to look at the Israeli hostage situation and what actually happened on October 7th. The story, again, you haven't been able to hear because it's already been censored. They've already taken the videos down in the interviews, but we have it. We're going to show it to you, what actually happened in Israel on that day. Interesting story that you probably haven't heard. We're also going to look at the vaccine lawsuits, which could be piling up now against Big Pharma because the floodgates have opened thanks to, I guess, I don't even say they discovered a loophole. I guess in this, we'll get into the details. Steve Kirsch is going to join us to dive deeply into what this could mean for Big Pharma with adverse events on these vaccines. We'll get there in a second. But first, it's hurricane season. And gosh, time to prepare is right now, making sure that you guys have food and items available so that your family can eat. Like when Hurricane Ida hit the Gulf Coast, it destroyed countless homes and left many without access to food and clean water. Millions lost power, some for weeks. The floods that followed the hurricane washed out roads, made it impossible for grocery stores to restock their shelves. Families were left hungry and desperate, waiting for the help that was slow to arrive. If you have to wait and rely on FEMA, oh my gosh, don't get me started. We saw what happened in Maui, right? Well, the answer is simple. You need to be prepared. Have emergency food kits from our friends over at 4 Patriots. That's the number 4 Patriots. Their long-lasting, delicious food options are specially designed to provide you and your loved ones with the sustenance you need when you need it most. 4 Patriots survival food kits are hand-packed in the United States. They last for up to 25 years. They come packed inside covert storage totes. Inside a wide variety of delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and it has thousands of 5-star customer reviews. It's not just for natural disasters, because in today's world of uncertainty, supply chains, unpredictable emergencies, it's more important than ever. What's going to happen if the United States goes to war with Iran? And what happens to the Straits of Hormuz when the oil pipeline is basically shut down? And what kind of energy crisis we could be seeing in the United States or throughout Europe? You need to have a backup plan, folks. Don't just wait till it's too late. Right now, just go to 4patriots.com and use the code REDACTED to get 10% off your first purchase on anything that's in the store, including our emergency food supply kits designed to last up to 25 years. So just go to 4patriots.com, use the code REDACTED to get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriots survival food. That's 4patriots.com and use that code REDACTED. The Israeli government has one official narrative of what happened on October 7th. Of course, the slaughter of 1,400 innocent Israelis at the hands of Hamas. But now, startling new testimony is starting to emerge that may change what we understand about that day. This could trouble a lot of people. Dan Cohen is the founder of Uncaptured Media, a filmmaker, the documentary Killing Gaza, with some of these new startling revelations. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to be with you, Clayton.
So what testimony has started to emerge from Israelis that could shed new light on what happened that day?
Well, in the days after the events of October 7th, an interview with a survivor of the kibbutz Be'eri, the Israeli kibbutz Be'eri, where many people died, gave an interview in Israeli media. And she said, she was very clear that, and repeated in her interview, that Israeli hostages were killed by Israeli gunfire, perhaps in a firefight between the Hamas fighters and Israeli military, but that it was Israeli military bullets that actually killed them.
בגינה של האנשים מהקיבוץ שיש 5 בני ערובה ששוכבים או 6 על האדמה בחוץ, ממש כצאן לטבח מול הירי של הימ"מ שלנו והמחבלים.
הטרוריסטים ירו בהם?
לא, הם נהרגו מהחילופי ירי, תבין שהיה חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד קשים.
זאת אומרת, יכול להיות שזה כוחותינו ירו בהם? כשניסו לפסל את החוטפים, את החמאס?
הם חיסלו את כולם, כולל הבני ערובה, כי היה שם חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד קשים. אני משוחררת בסביבות השעה 5:30, ב8:30 כנראה מסתיימת הלחימה, אחרי שהיה חילופי אש מטורפים, אפילו 2 פקדים של טנק שירו לתוך הבית, שזה בית קיבוצי קטן, זה לא איזה, רואים את זה בחדשות.
כן.
זה לא מקום גדול. וברגע הזה כולם נהרגו, היה שקט חוץ מצולה אחת שיצאה הדס דגן, וזהו וגם.
איך כולם נהרגו?
מהחילופי אש.
מהחילופי אש, כלומר יכול להיות שגם זה מאש כוחותינו?
חד משמעית.
כן?
וככה אני מאמינה.
אוי, זה נשמע כל כך רע.
כן, וכולם מתו.
So that interview was actually censored by the Israeli government in order to prevent it from getting to the Israeli public, which had basically been through this shock and awe propaganda campaign to convince them that everything that just happened on October 7th was purely a Hamas terrorist attack, that Hamas is worse than ISIS, and so there can be no negotiation. And the only answer is to obliterate Gaza, and whatever happened in those horrible scenes on that horrible day of October 7th is purely the fault of Hamas and has nothing to do with Israeli military tactics or strategy or decisions that were made either on the fly that day. Now, there has been another article that came out in the Israeli liberal magazine Haaretz, in which it cites an Israeli military figure who was there. There was one who was in a bunker near Gaza, who was trying to call in airstrikes on this kibbutz, of course, which would have killed everybody. That did not happen. However, what did happen is another Israeli commander who was on the scene actually ordered his men, his soldiers, to open fire on everyone in these houses. So the Hamas militants were inside these houses with Israeli hostages, under the belief, apparently, that because they have hostages, they'd be able to get back into Gaza, as others had. But the Israeli military, this commander, and we don't know how high up this decision-making goes, decided, no, we're going to kill everyone in here, including with use of tank shells. This is according to this Haaretz article. So, I mean, what actually happened, clearly, is the Israeli military said, we are not going to negotiate with Hamas at all, and we're going to kill everyone here, including our own people. Now, this has been pretty much hidden from the Israeli public as best as possible with the censorship of that interview. Yasmin Porat is the survivor's name. And but now that has been published in Haaretz. So, I mean, it raises way more questions about what actually happened, not only in Be'eri, but in other places too, where many Israelis were killed. And that's not to say that Hamas did not kill people. Definitely that happened. But Israel apparently clearly killed its own people in order to avoid negotiations.
So a couple of questions here, right? Because immediately people would say, well, obviously, all right, well, come on, Dan, this has got to be friendly fire, right? That it was probably friendly fire. And in the scuffle of the moment, the Israeli military dealing with Hamas terrorists, which just invaded and were carrying out this brutal attack, that yes, clearly there was going to be people killed accidentally, that it would have been friendly fire. How do they address that piece of it?
Well, according to this Haaretz article, and I'll just read exactly what he says. This is according to Nir Hasson, the Israeli journalist. He says, and he's quoting a resident of the Be'eri who survived. He says, after commanders in the field made difficult decisions, including shelling houses with all their occupants inside in order to eliminate the terrorists along with the hostages, did the IDF complete the takeover of the kibbutz. The price was terrible. At least 112 Be'eri people were killed. So there's also another part of this article there's another one on October 11th that that quotes a guy named Erez, a deputy commander, and he says they fought inside the kibbutz from house to house with the tanks. We had no choice. So they're actually firing tank shells. It's not as if there was, there was clearly close combat, and maybe some of them were killed by friendly fire, in combat, in gun battles between Hamas and the Israeli forces. And that seems to be what Yasmin Porat, the first one to come out and give her testimony, was describing. However,
so she came out and said that it was friendly fire. That's what she was describing.
She was saying that yes, that Israelis were killed by Israeli gunfire, not that the Israeli military decided pure only to kill their own people, but so basically at first what we learned from her testimony is that best case scenario is that it was friendly fire, in a clash between the two sides. But later, with the publication of these other articles, what became clear is the Israeli military made a decision in the field to kill everyone there using tank shells and just opening fire on the houses where Hamas was holding these hostages. We have to look at this in context of something called the Hannibal Directive, which is an Israeli military procedure to kill any Israeli soldier taken captive by enemy forces. So in 2014, this was implemented in the 51-day war on Gaza in the southern city of Rafah, where Hamas had managed to take captive an Israeli soldier named Hadar Golden. And when that happened, the Israeli military used the full might of its force and bombed this area massively, killing Hadar Golden, their own soldier, as well as well over 100 Palestinians at the same time. This became known as Black Friday among Palestinians. So this is the Hannibal Directive, and I think what we saw in Be'eri, where this occurred on October 7th, is the very same logic as what happened in 2014, the Hannibal Directive, that we are not going to allow any Israelis to be taken captive, taken hostage, so we're just going to kill them all. So then there can be no negotiations. And then look at what's happening inside the Gaza Strip, where hundreds of Israelis are held hostage and captive by Hamas, and Israel is doing nothing, at least publicly, to secure the release. There's no negotiations that anyone knows about, and is instead bombing the entire place to smithereens, turning it into a big pile of rubble and killing, we're well over 5,000 Palestinians dead, including 400 overnight. And according to Hamas, dozens of Israeli hostages have been killed in the bombing too, which makes perfect sense. So, is the Hannibal Directive, this policy of Israel killing its own people to prevent negotiations, is this being applied throughout the Gaza Strip?
Israeli sources have told me that they thought it was a great mistake for them not to have done more to try to get those initial 200 or so hostages back immediately within the first 24 to 48 hours. And now, in many ways, they become a significant liability. And what I'm hearing from different Israeli sources is these hostages will likely not be living for very much longer, especially as this ground assault unfolds. Does that comport with what you're hearing from your sources as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the families of the hostages are absolutely desperate. They're demonstrating outside of Hakiria, the Israeli Defense Ministry in Tel Aviv. And in fact, there is a video that went around of people attacking the families and calling them traitors and saying they hope those hostages die. So there's an element of Israeli society that fully agrees with this logic that, no matter what, the state is more important than the people. So, I mean, no negotiations, just kill everyone. That is basically the Israeli government's policy. And had even in Be'eri, or when those hostages were taken into Gaza, had it said, hold on, let's pause. We know we can negotiate with Hamas, as we have done many, many times before, through intermediaries, through Egypt, through Qatar, then they could have worked something out. But instead, the Israeli government is intent on destroying Gaza and obliterating as many people as possible, including its own citizens.
Do you think, we heard over the weekend, of course, Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying no negotiations, no ceasefire. The United States isn't interested in a ceasefire agreement. But you have, of course, President of Turkey coming out, Erdogan, saying that he would be happy to mediate a peacefire agreement, a negotiation perhaps between Hamas and, Palestinians and, of course, Israel. And that may actually help release some of these hostages. Do you think that there's an appetite for any mediation by Erdogan and the Turks?
Definitely. I mean, we see these massive demonstrations all over the world, but in Turkey, there's obviously a lot of sympathy for Palestinians and seeing what Israel's doing to Gaza. There's no doubt that the people want a ceasefire and negotiations. And so, Erdogan is well positioned to do that. I mean, Turkey is influential in Gaza, and of course has strong contacts with Israel. So, I mean, Erdogan could do it, Qatar could do it, Egypt could do it, the U.S., in some capacity could do it.
Right.
Yeah, but you need two partners to be willing to negotiate. And I mean, Hamas actually released a few hostages the other day, American Israeli hostages, and turned them over to the Israeli military in exchange for that small amount of aid that came in, and has said, Hamas alleged that they offered to release 2 Israelis and gave their names and ID numbers for humanitarian reasons for nothing in exchange, not demanding anything. And they say the Israeli government denied it, refused it, rejected it. The Israeli government has said that this is a lie, that it's propaganda, but I mean, considering Israel is bombing everything in sight, and you can be sure that is killing its own hostages inside Gaza, as it did in Be'eri, in the kibbutz on October 7th. Well, it's not very credible in terms of how it's trying to do anything to secure the release of those hostages. And of course, for Hamas, it doesn't. Having dead Israeli hostages, killing them doesn't really do any good. Hamas did say early on after October 7th that if the bombing without warning of residential homes didn't stop, then it would begin executing the hostages one by one on camera. Well, the bombing of the bombing without warning never stopped, and Hamas never actually did what it said it would do. So, I mean, that really says a lot.
Yeah.
It says a lot right there. The only reason Hamas wants those captives is to be able to negotiate. And I think what they figured is, we got 200 hostages. Israel has to negotiate. And Israel basically, called their ante and said, no, we're not going to negotiate. We're going to kill all of you, including our own people. So you want to see crazy? I'll show you crazy, is basically Israel's position.
Yeah. You thought these were going to be bargaining chips, these 200 hostages? Well, we've just leveled half of northern Gaza. So it doesn't seem that they are much of a bargaining chip at this stage, unfortunately. Unbelievable. Just real quick, we'll get you out of here on this. When the censorship started this initial interview with this Israeli woman, where was that initial interview? Who did the initial interview, and how was it suppressed? How was it suddenly blocked in Israel?
The Israeli military holds there's an Israeli state censor. So, for even a foreign journalist or Israeli journalist, you have to abide by that, or else you can, as an Israeli citizen, you can be held liable legally for breaking the censor. And so if they order that, then, Israeli journalists must legally comply. The foreign press, the New York Times or anyone else doesn't have to abide by that because they don't have any way to enforce it. But the Western media typically goes along with it. If there's like a gag order from the Israeli state censor, then, all of the Western media does it. And so this was, I'd have to look and see exactly what channel in Israel it was published on. But after it was censored, it was published by the Electronic Intifada. So that's who actually, broke this story out of, Israeli. Yeah, exactly. The censorship.
Interesting. Dan Cohen, thank you so much from Uncaptured Media. Appreciate it. You can follow him on Twitter. What is your Twitter handle?
At Dan Cohen 3000, and I'm on Twitter all the time, and we're doing a lot at Uncaptured Media. So it's Uncaptured News on Twitter, and you can check us out on YouTube and Rumble.
Absolutely. Dan's not getting a lot of sleep these days, I can tell you that. Nonstop working on this. Dan,
lots
great to see you. Yeah, lots of coffee, lots of great coverage. Thank you so much for this story, Dan. This is a story that people have not heard because it's being censored. So thank you for this. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Clayton.
Thanks, Dan. And a lot of people in the chat were saying, is Dan Cohen, is Cohen Jewish? Yes, Dan is Jewish, by the way, just in case you're wondering.
Yeah.
Just a few minutes ago, we got reports of massive rocket barrage on Tel Aviv. Apparently, Hamas launching a massive rocket barrage at Israel. 5 wounded there. Antony Blinken on the U.S. side says, we will defend Israel. Apparently, they lost. Hamas launched a rocket barrage just a short time ago. 5 Israelis have been injured, according to emergency services. And it appears some attacks are ramping back up, at least. And about 1 million people, I guess, went into shelter all over the area as well. And so we'll keep our eye on what's happening in Tel Aviv overnight as well, and bring you that as we have it here on the show. Unbelievable. All right, we've got more news to get to here on your show.
That's right. Coming up, we're going to talk with Steve Kirsch, who's been following the lies that we were told about vaccines, and how possibly now that we have proof of possible corruption between Pfizer and the FDA, that the litigation may be coming and pierce that armor. So we're going to see what he thinks of that. But first,
we want to tell you about our community. If you'd like to become a Plus member, you can do that by joining the rebellion. Again, we are not funded by billionaires. We don't have George Soros funding us, and we don't have anybody else funding us. We are supported by you guys, and really, really helps when we have users like you who are able to, and viewers like you who are able to support for just the price of a cup of coffee once a month. You can join our Plus Club. It's free to watch the show. Of course, we do this show for free. And we've got a great team here, and we do it for free on Rumble, and we do it for free on Twitter. But if you'd like to go that extra level, you can go to redacted.inc and click on the Become a VIP member. You get access to exclusive interviews and content, live streams. In fact, I think later this week we're going to be doing a special live stream just for our Plus members, because we're working on a whole new studio build-out stuff, and we're gonna do it with you guys. It'll just be just the members if you're in our Plus Club. We're going to put this together, and it'll be fun. We'll all get together. It'll be a special live stream just for our Plus Club members this Friday, as you can kind of see the behind the scenes of it all coming together. So just go to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen there, click on the Plus Club membership, become a Redacted Rebel VIP, and you can support us for like the price of a cup of coffee. Again, redacted.inc.
Last week, Health Canada admitted that the Pfizer COVID vaccine contained a DNA sequence of SV40, that is the simian virus, that is the was from the 40th monkey virus that had been identified. Now, the FDA and the CDC have not said whether they knew about this. They haven't said if they knew that it was in the original COVID vaccines or if Pfizer is somehow keeping something from us. Joining us to discuss is Steve Kirst. He's from the Vaccine Safety Research Foundation. He's also a health blogger who's been following so many lies about the COVID vaccination program and the pandemic. So thank you so much for joining us. Can you explain why this revelation is important?
Yeah, it's the first time that a health authority anywhere in the world has acknowledged what Kevin McKernan, who's a research scientist, found and published back in April of this year, saying that in the Pfizer vaccine, there's an SV40 promoter sequence in that. And that's an active ingredient. It's not supposed to be there. Nobody has said anything about it's supposed to be there. It's not on the label anywhere for Pfizer. And to this point, no health authority had spoken out about it. So now at least we have one honest health authority in the entire world, which is Health Canada, which has confirmed that, yes, that sequence is in there. That is what they are producing. And also, and they didn't admit this, but the documents that Pfizer provided to the FDA show that they deliberately removed the identification of SV40 from the documents that they handed to the FDA. And presumably, they removed this reference to the documents that they handed to every health authority in the world. Now, only Health Canada has acknowledged this, and they don't seem to be too upset about it. And all the authorities that I've talked to are extremely upset about it because it is an active ingredient, and we don't know what the repercussions are. So it could be completely de minimis, but the people I've talked to say that that is very unlikely. Now, we don't know the extent of what the implications of this. Is this going to impact the health? What's the clinical significance of this? Is this going to impact the health of hundreds of thousands of people, of millions of people? And in what way? Is it going to be a minor impact? Is it going to be a major impact? Is this going to be spread to future generations as well? There are a lot of unanswered questions here. And there are people who are saying, oh, no, this is nothing to worry about here, folks, you know.
Right. Let me just bring you one example of this from a Twitter or X user named Philip Buchholz, saying it's just the SV40 promoter, not the cancer-causing SV40T antigen. It's not a cancer accelerator. The sequence is a standard bit of molecular biology engineering, and it's been used for decades. Now, I wonder just how they know that when we talked about this story yesterday, the story of Bernice Eddy, who found that the Salk vaccine, the Salk polio vaccine, had SV40 and was causing tumors in hamsters. And she was told, don't publish that. She lost her lab for publishing that and was demoted and moved to a different lab. So this shows just how much there is no appetite for studying the components of a vaccine. So do we know that, it's just the antigen or it's fine? Where's the research to show that?
Well, what we know is that it's just the promoter sequence, which is a smaller sequence than the entire virus. So they didn't include the entire virus into the vaccine. They just included this relatively small sequence that is part of SV40. Now, what this does is it enables essentially DNA to get into cells. So the question really is how significant this is, because we have never, ever had this delivered in lipid nanoparticles into people's cells all over their body. And so there is no precedent for this. And anyone who tells you there is a precedent for this and they know what's going to happen is lying to you. So the bottom line is we don't know. And it's important for us to find out. And we have to do that with careful experiments. Now, we cannot depend on any government or any health authority anywhere in the world to do these experiments. So they have to be privately funded in research labs where essentially they're being done under the radar so that the authorities don't try to shut it down. Because, as you know, with public health, it's the job of the public to protect the public from the governments. It used to be the reverse when I was younger, and I'm certainly very quickly discovering the truth that they're not interested. There's no excuse. This was brought up in public, widely discussed, widely known back in April of 2023, and the governments should have been saying, whoa, wait a second, you're right, we confirm this in the sequence. It takes minutes to confirm this in the sequence that Pfizer gave the FDA. They should have confirmed it, that this is correct. They should have also realized that this sequence is in the lipid nanoparticles. And so it's inserted into every one of these cells. And this is a huge, huge problem. And it's an even bigger problem that nobody's saying anything. And not only is nobody saying anything, but nobody's doing anything. So when Health Canada said, yeah, you're right, this is in there, they didn't say, hey, wait a second, hold on, stop using the vaccine for now. If you don't have like an urgent need to get vaccinated, maybe you should hold off.
Right.
They're not even doing that. They're not even doing the basic the precautionary principle of medicine says, hey, when you have something like this, which looks like it could be pretty explosive, where you talk to experts and they say, and you get mixed opinions, right?
Sure.
You'll talk to some experts and say, nothing to see here, folks. This is common sequence, blah, blah, blah.
But that's just what it is. It's an opinion because there's a refusal to study it.
It's an opinion. It's an opinion. It's not based on any data. And that's the point. Where is the data? Show me the data, the studies that were done where these fragments are in lipid nanoparticles that are injected into people's bodies into billions and billions of copies. And by the way, there is a specification that the regulators have of contamination, of DNA contamination in these vials. And there's supposed to be a very small, it's under 10 nanograms per dose of DNA fragments that are allowed in these vaccines. Now, if you measure it one way, which is very not sensitive, which is this quantitative PCR test, the vaccines meet the standard. But if you measure it a different way with fluorometry, then what happens is you find that the standard is exceeded by orders of magnitude. So here's the question. I don't think they specified how this is supposed to be measured. So by any objective standard, by any objective measure, the contamination is there. It is in at a much higher rate than as desired by the regulators, as specified by the regulators. But I don't think the regulators specified how it should be measured. Should it be measured accurately, or should it be measured inaccurately by a technique which undercounts the amount of contamination? Now, there is, some people point out, look, there's evidence that the regulators use quantitative PCR to measure this, which is the way to measure it such that you don't get the accurate count. And so they could argue that, well, the regulators are actually, they meant to say that it should be measured using the inaccurate method rather than the accurate method. Now, where did the regulators say that?
Right.
You're making an assumption. I think that it could also be argued, on the other hand, that maybe the regulators didn't realize that there was a difference in the measurement techniques that they used versus what should be used in this case, and that it would exceed their standards. Now, the only way to find out that question is to ask a regulator, and of course, the regulators aren't asking or aren't answering any questions, and they're not going to respond to you or to anyone else. And the mainstream media is certainly not going to ask them that question. So we're never going to really know the answer to that question because they don't want to talk about this.
Now something that you've said, though, what I totally agree with you, we're not going to get government response on this, but something that you're sort of putting your faith or hope in is litigation. You think that if the FDA is dragged into litigation, then they'll have to admit, did they know this or didn't they? If Pfizer is dragged into litigation, they will too. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, well, certainly when you have jurisdiction over them because you have a lawsuit that has not been dismissed, then you get to do things like discovery. And when you do discovery, that means depositions, which means that they're required to answer questions. And this is the only way that we can actually get our questions answered is through lawsuits and asking the questions like, what did you know about this? What did you do? What actions were taken to assess the harm here? Why wasn't any action taken to assess the harms? Why didn't you ask Pfizer why they deliberately moved the SV40 promoter sequence from the documents that they handed to you? What is the explanation for that? And then you can ask them questions like, why is some of these things are very strange that when people look at these sequences, they find that there are things that in there that should not be there in a production vaccine. And why are they there? And it's probably because, well, we took some shortcuts and we took this research vehicle that we had on the shelf, and we just used that and deployed it because we were in such a rush, rather than to actually design something that is fit for purpose, meaning that this is something that we designed to inject into people as a therapy, as opposed to inject into animals for research studies where we have a whole bunch of things going on that really shouldn't be there.
Okay. So do you think that, and I'm with you on that, I think that we litigate our values, and our value should be transparency, to know what we were given without informed consent. So is this something that is possibly a class action, do you think? Or
yes.
Do you think
absolutely.
You do. The problem with that question is that, Pfizer could just settle and we wouldn't ever get answers. So we need the right litigation team to push this beyond settlement, right? What do you think of that?
Yeah. There's just because you can sue for anything, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to win. It doesn't mean that your case is going to go on and not be dismissed, right? So you could always sue Pfizer, right? But you'll probably end up losing, and if you did it today, you probably end up losing as well. But there are things going on in America. So, for example, attorney Aaron Siri has brought a case which, if it's successful, and he believes that it will be successful, because if he didn't believe that, he wouldn't be wasting his time bringing the case. He thinks he can take down the protections that are granted in the legislation that is designed to protect
the PrEP Act
Pfizer.
Is what you're talking about.
The PrEP Act.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And so once that happens, then of course all bets are off. Then we don't even have to worry about whether this promoter sequence is in there. But there was a case in Chicago where a patient was injected with remdesivir that was contaminated with glass particles. ground up glass particles. And so what happened was there was a defect in the manufacturing process where a glass vial got accidentally put into a machine and got crushed up and put in vaccine vials.
Oh, that's how that happened. Okay.
Yeah. So Moderna, to its credit, notified everybody that, oh, we messed up. We're doing a recall of this. But not everybody got the word. So some people got injected with remdesivir. Sorry, did I say I said Moderna? I meant Gilead.
Gilead, right?
So Gilead, to their credit, they notified the hospitals, but this hospital somehow didn't get the message for whatever means. This vial was injected into a human being, causing the clotting. The judge ruled that the liability protection doesn't protect the manufacturer. So Gilead, in this case, is not protected and can be sued because there's foreign material that is not supposed to be in the vials. So the question is, because they deliberately covered it up and said to the FDA, no, can't identify any gene sequences here because they deliberately removed them. The question is whether that is now considered adulteration of the vaccine because this promoter sequence, which is an active ingredient, is in the vaccine. It was not on the label. The FDA didn't know about it. Okay. So what the FDA approved is different than what you received, and that's known as adulteration. Now, the FDA itself can take action on this. So they can say, better warn the public, let's write a letter to the manufacturer, let's stick a warning label on it, or let's recall the product. Now, there are a variety of other things they can do, but those are some of the main things that the FDA is allowed to do. Now, the FDA is also permitted to do absolutely nothing. So if there's contamination in there and they think that not a problem, they can do absolutely nothing.
Right. We talked about
that's what they're doing based on no evidence.
And they are allowed to, for instance, we learned from the book Dope Sick that FDA regulators and Big Pharma had been holding these private meetings, developing what they called enriched enrollment, where they allowed drug companies to weed out people from their studies who didn't respond well to their drugs, therefore tipping the balance towards FDA approval. So we know from precedents that the FDA is in bed with the hand that feeds them, I guess, is a way to put it. So we can't really expect them to hold Pfizer's feet to the fire. So it's on us then to litigate against the FDA if that's even possible.
Yes, and you can petition the FDA to do the proper actions. And the FDA has a long time to respond to that. And then they can choose not to take action. And then you can file a writ of mandamus in the court to force them to take action. But the court can also then say, well, look, what the law says is that the FDA is permitted to make the decision on that. They clearly decided to not take any action. So I can force them to follow the law, but the law says that they have the option. And so it's not even clear that even if you got a writ of mandamus and the judge, that it would be granted because, or that even if it was granted, that it would make any difference because the law says that the FDA is allowed to have contaminants in. So if there's arsenic in the vaccines at a toxic level, the FDA can basically decide to do nothing. And you can petition the FDA and they can do nothing. Then you could try to get a court to overrule them, which would be hard because the courts like to defer to the FDA because they know what they're doing. Or that's what the judges think.
This is philosopher Thomas Saz warned about pharmacracy. It's the expansion of government power through medical emergencies, and it's disenfranchising us all. So thank you for following this. I encourage you to follow Steve Kirsch's Twitter or X feed, because he's following this so acutely. It's amazing. Also, is it public that, where do your blogs, are they on? I'm sorry, remind us.
So I have Substack.
Substack.
Where I do most
Thank
of my
you.
writings. I've written about 1,500 articles. SteveKirsch.substack.com, or also KirschSubstack.com is another way to get to it.
Okay.
And on Twitter, I'm St. Kirsch.
Okay. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Well, that's going to do it for us tonight at Redacted. We will be back tomorrow, same time. It's 4 p.m. Eastern. We're here every day, Monday through Thursday. We appreciate you being here too. Remember that you can subscribe to the newsletter and also visit our Redacted store. If you like what you see here, you want to signal to the world that you stand for free speech, you stand for open thought, you stand for questioning government narratives. Wear some Redacted stuff. Use a Redacted mug. Just check it out. We have our new merchandise, including my favorite, our shirts and logos that say, what is the expression? About being a peace extremist? Yeah, non-pacifist peace extremists. That's the catchy little slogan I came up with. I'm standing by it because that's what I am. Non-pacifist peace extremist. You can show the world you are one too. So whatever you do, thank you so much for being here. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll be here tomorrow. Hope you will be too. Bye then.